We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
If you define a vigilante as somebody who is so motivated by their values that they begin to operate outside of the confines of legality or of mainstream networks of communication, if that's what a vigilante is, then a graffiti writer is a vigilante, a social vigilante. On the other hand, some vigilantes do want to get rid of graffiti or clean up the community or make it free of graffiti, and I think they're both reaching out in non-normative ways.
You know, human beings have been making marks that we know of for 45,000 years. For the most part, graffiti is a way of saying something, and it's driven by a creative urge within somebody. It's an outlet for creative expression. This is a different kind of expression. It's almost an expression of a repression, of pushing down, of covering, of eliminating.
Silver and gray, I think, are used here because it's the absence of any color. It is a true anti-statement, anti-art. It's like a black hole in the middle of something. I mean, less than anything. I mean, less than nothing.
He got busted at least 6 to 8 times. First 5 times, he got let loose. They were just like, okay, you're a citizen and you're trying to do the right thing and you want to get rid of these, like, punk graffiti writers and shit, because nobody likes graffiti writers. And so, you know, they kept letting him off, but they kept saying, oh, but you need to stop doing that. And he didn't stop. When he finally got like busted, arrested, put in jail, I was stoked. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's only right. He was going out in the late nights just like we were and spray painting stuff.
The voices you just heard are from a new movie called Vigilante, directed by Max Vigilante and Nate Woolman, and the film is a documentary. It's a very interesting documentary because it touches on a number of different themes that are fairly important themes. If you're a human, you're invested on some level in the right to express yourself, the freedom of expression. It is the most fundamental act of being a human, freedom of expression. And what comes into question, the debate in the film that arises out of the documentation of the clash between graffiti artists and the people that want to stop them, a.k.a. the buffers, is what is that freedom of expression? What right does the individual have? Is graffiti art? Is it a clash between order and chaos? Something that we're constantly trying to deal with in our individual lives and in our collective lives, are these people on the front lines of a collective fissure where they're acting out something much more titanic and archetypal. Is it a hate crime? How far can you express yourself? One of the things that comes up in the interview with Max Vigilante, which you're about to hear, is that, hey, look, this is all good. All graffiti's good. He says that at one point. It's all good. But then as I drill down a little bit, he says that, well, there are some rules. And one of the rules is that you stay away from hate. You stay away from racist or hateful graffiti. Well, and I didn't really bring this up with him because we were kind of running short on time, but if there is freedom of expression or freedom of speech, which technically this would be covered in the Constitution, it would not matter if it was hateful or not, because at the very least then you can begin to have a dialogue about the hateful element that it represents, or why it's appearing in a certain neighborhood, who's doing it, what group is actually doing it. I talked to Max a little bit about a story that happened, I think it was about 3 years ago, and it took place in New York, where a guy was in his apartment and he shot himself accidentally. Wasn't fatal, but what happened was that the manager of the apartment building went up to this guy's apartment. And he called the cops too, because somebody got shot in the apartment. Well, it's going to call the cops. So the cops show up. They go to his apartment. He's wounded. He shot himself in the leg. Who knows what he was trying to do with the wound. We know he was trying to clean a gun. That's what was happening. They went into his apartment. They found a whole arsenal of weapons. Not only did they find an arsenal of weapons, but they found an arsenal of spray paint cans. And they actually were able to link this guy to spraying anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish graffiti in the area, which had been popping up all over the place. The problem is that he was Jewish. He actually had some very interesting credentials, meaning he worked for a certain agency that exists outside this country. So it's not always clear-cut who's doing the graffiti, if you know what I'm saying. And we get into this a little bit in the interview, but it's a really fascinating film. It's available. It comes out on DVD today. It's available online. You can pay for it, download it, support these guys. It's really worth watching. It's fascinating also to the extent that the two filmmakers actually put themselves in the movie. A lot of times you'll see a documentary. You see, documentaries are fascinating because quite often you think that what you see is what you get. Well, that's not really always the case. Many times the documentarian will skew the results of a certain scene or a certain segment in order to tilt the documentary in their direction or to make something happen. And many times they're quite unapologetic around this. Werner Herzog tends to be the worst offender of manipulating reality for his documentaries. But even to that extent, when the documentarian enters into the fray of the subject matter itself, it tends to be off camera. Every now and then the documentarian will break that wall, and that's what Max and Nate do in this movie. They break the wall. They're part of the documentary. Not only are they part of the documentary, but they take an active part in rounding up one of the most popular buffers in the United States. Now, to understand graffiti, you have to understand some of the terminology. A buffer is the guy that comes around and cleans up. It's a person that cleans up after graffiti has been sprayed. So they're buffing out the space. Communities that have programs which are, graffiti abatement and, restoration. I mean, they devote a number of tax dollars each year to go out and clean up the neighborhood so that the graffiti can be taken away. That's buffing. Now, there is a group of individuals who are known as vigilante buffers, meaning that they go out on their own and they will go over the markings of the previous night. And the most well-known buffers are profiled in the film. One is a guy by the name of Jim Sharp. He's the main focus of the film because both Nate and Max live in Berkeley, and Jim Sharp does his buffing all throughout North Berkeley. And he's known as the silver buff because he uses silver paint to spray over graffiti. But the thing with Jim Sharp, which is fascinating, is he doesn't really stop at just spraying over graffiti. He takes it to another level. He'll take down public notices. Like if you have a band and you put your poster up for your band, he will take it down. Doesn't matter if it was there 1 night, 2 nights, 3 nights a week, he'll take it down. He also weeds. He picks up weeds. So there's an obsessive quality about Jim Sharp. He's actually a very smart guy, and that comes through in the film. He's the main person that's profiled. The other person who's profiled is a guy by the name of John Connolly, and he is very different. Or Joe Connolly. He's very different than Jim Sharp. Jim Sharp is kind of mysterious and aloof and serious edge. Joe Connolly is totally out there. He's incredibly transparent. He's manic. He is the buffer king of Los Angeles. He's kind of a celebrity. He's got a very interesting relationship with the graffiti community. He loves graffiti and he hates graffiti. At the same time, it's a really bizarre kind of, relationship, symbiotic relationship he has with the graffiti world. And what's interesting about these guys is that they operate outside of society, because the city is not telling them what to do. They're doing it on their own. And at the same time, they're trying to kind of emulate or reinforce civility and order. So they're both very conservative and very radical simultaneously. And they're kind of despised by the graffiti community. The third character, let me take that back. Joe Connolly is not really despised. He's actually sort of liked. But again, his activities tend to go beyond just the removal of graffiti. For instance, he found a group of homeless people living on the side of a freeway in Los Angeles. He found them. And what he decided to do is he decided to go in and cut back the trees and weed and restore that patch of land and expose these homeless people to the light so they couldn't sleep at night. So he has this overarching drive to restore order in his life and the life of people around him. One of the backstories for him is he lost his son when his son was, I believe, 10 or 11 years old. And they touch on that briefly in the film. And you can tell that this is an event that sort of has pushed him towards the edge. And then the third character is a guy named Carl Rathke. He lives in New Orleans, and he's not a well-liked guy. At least Jim Sharp and Joe Connolly allowed the filmmakers to talk to them. Carl Rathke would not. And what's fascinating about his story is that he was actually caught tagging. So he's got his own weird thing going on. Joe Connolly, by the way, was also videotaped by a woman in Vigilante creating his own graffiti. He didn't like that, but they caught him. So there's this weird symbiosis going on with these people that are struggling with order and chaos in their lives. But it's also a much larger philosophical debate. In Rathke's case, he actually really turned up the volume post-Katrina, and there was an artist who was because a lot of those street signs have been wiped out and there is a general sense of devastation in New Orleans, this one artist decided to put up wooden street signs that he had painted on light poles and telephone poles. And he also did a series of graffiti blasts called NOLA Rising, which was about the rise of New Orleans. So this was not contemptible, derogatory, hate-filled graffiti. It wasn't even the type of graffiti which is almost impossible to decipher. This was a specific type of graffiti with a message, and one that was filled with hope. And that wasn't good enough for this Rathke guy. Not good enough at all. And in fact, most of the graffiti was put on these small wooden pieces and then, nailed up on light poles and telephone poles, which meant that they were temporary. You could remove them. And yet, Karl Rathke pulled that stuff down. So he's the film's villain. So this is a fascinating, fascinating movie. And it's really well done in terms of it's got, real-time footage. And then also has some animation in the movie, really good animation. They talk with one of the guys who started this campaign called Broken Windows, which is this, Malcolm Gladwell talks about this in the book, The Tipping Point. There was two people they were police captains from Boston. Let me just reference them. Hold on a second. I'll tell you who they are. So this is the Broken Windows theory, and this was started by James Q. Wilson and George L. Kelly. And what they came up with, so here, let me give you the background of this. So the article received a great deal of attention from Wikipedia and was widely cited. A 1996 criminology and urban sociology book, Fixing Broken Windows, Restoring Order and Reducing Crime in Our Communities by George L. Kelly and co-author Catherine Coles. It's based on the article, but develops an argument in greater detail, discusses the theory in relation to crime and strategies to contain or eliminate crime from urban neighborhoods. So essentially, Broken Windows boils down to this. They noticed that if a window was broken in a neighborhood, that the broken window would be like a gateway to some other form of social degradation, be it to property or be it to people. It was the beginning of blight. So what would happen is that they would fix the window as quickly as possible. And the broken window is just a symbol, right? It could be anything. It could be graffiti. So the whole idea would be you fix that as quickly as possible, and at a surface level, you begin to maintain a sense of order, and that people will cohere to the external markings and the external symbols of order. And there is some truth to that, but when you go down about 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 levels deep, it doesn't always work out that way. So what happened in the 90s is that so Giuliani decided that he wanted to make the subways rideable. The city was losing huge amounts of money on the subways. And so what he did is he hired these guys who wrote Broken Windows. And they looked at the subway situation. They said, okay, we're not going to allow a subway to leave the station if it had not been repainted. Because what was happening is the subways were the moving billboards for graffiti artists. So they went in and they cleaned up every single subway before it, left the station. So what that did is it demoralized the graffiti artists, because they would put in all this time and work and energy, and their fantasy was to watch the subways, take their message from borough to borough throughout New York, moving billboards. And when they would put in all this work, and the next morning the subways would leave and they were spotless, well, it put a damper on their creativity. And after a while, they moved on to other targets. But there was more to it than just painting the subways. They did other things. One of the things that they also did was that a lot of the turnstiles at that time were broken. And so people were not paying, people were jumping over them. It became very important for the city to fix the turnstiles. It became a number 2 priority right after cleaning the subways. And the third priority, and this is where it gets a little weird, the third priority was that if they had somebody who was not paying, jumping the turnstile, which is pretty common, that it would cost them more money to process them than it would for them to pay the 50 cents or the 75 cents of the dollar token. Much more money. So from an ROI perspective, the city of New York would just let them do that, because what would be the alternative? Spending thousands of dollars processing a 50-cent coin. Now what happened was that under these two guys, Kelly and Wilson, what they suggested was that you take these mobile units, like being able to not only arrest but process them right on the spot, that you could do it much more efficiently and quickly. So then what they did is they had these mobile units now parked outside the subway stations. If somebody jumped the subway turnstile, they'd arrest them. Then they'd run a check on them. And, you know, most of the time they had warrants or other things that they were responsible for. Now the city's looking at them and saying, wow, we can really get some money out of you. You've got this unpaid ticket, you didn't show up to this court date, whatever that thing was. Now they could hammer that person. It became actually profitable for the city, because instead of having to take all these guys downtown, they brought downtown to the subway stations. So now you had subways that were clean, turnstiles fixed, and then this whole notion of people cheating the system was nipped in the bud. So what happened? New York all of a sudden was able to transform their subway experience almost overnight. Now they think that there's a link between fixing broken windows, and especially New York, and the fall in crime rate. Well, there can be some correlation to this, but the fall in crime rate probably has to do with the fact that New York's become a very expensive city to live in. And the people who don't have a lot of money, who are the underclass, who rob for drugs, who rob for sustenance, whatever that thing is, they moved out of the city because they can't afford it. You go to Times Square now versus Times Square in the 80s, it's like another planet. In Times Square, it became Disneyland. In the 80s, it was very seedy. I remember going to New York for the first time in 1983, and it was kind of a pit, to be honest with you. It's not a pit now. So did broken windows help, or did the gentrification, which is kind of a more advanced, luxurious broken windows on steroids, did that turn the tide for New York? And even if it did, and here's where you go like 4, 5, 6, 7 levels deep, you know, on the surface you have order, there's cleanliness, you know, you're not going to get hassled when you ride the subway. Meanwhile, New York is, you know, ground zero for corruption, for graft, for the hijacking of funds through hedge funds, through Wall Street, through the futures commodities, through 9/11, through Larry Silverstein. Yes, it looks good on the surface, but guess what? There's a worm at the center that's rotting it from the inside out. So what this film poses is questions like that. If we have a society that, for all intents and purposes, is clean on the surface, what's going on underneath? The two don't always match up. So why can't people express themselves? Because really, at a deeper level, it's still crap. And in fact, maybe the people that are expressing themselves are being made to be scapegoats for a system that is on the surface orderly, but beneath filled with chaos, strife, and degradation. Again, this is what the film touches on. It's what I touched on in the interview with Max, which you'll hear momentarily. So it's a fascinating dialogue. And I don't know, it's one of those things where people have an opinion about graffiti. You know, love it, hate it, love a little bit of it, hate a lot of it. Frankly, my opinion on graffiti, I think that people do have the right to express themselves. But I don't always want to look at other people's expressions. It's kind of like theoretically, we all have the right to walk around naked, okay? We do. If everybody decided that they wanted to walk around naked for a day, what could the authorities do? Nothing. But do you want to see everybody walking around naked? See, that's the other thing. Because I guarantee you, there are people you don't want to see naked. Now, I'm not judging their form, but I'm just telling you, you don't want to see them naked. And in that way, clothing actually is doing us all a service. It's the same with graffiti. There's some graffiti that is really stunning. It's like, wow, look at that. That is something. And there's other graffiti where it's like, it's just like somebody just defecated or pissed on somebody's property. Not a fan. Just not a fan. So everybody's got their own relationship to graffiti. I actually think it's pretty cool if it's done well, and if it's in an area that is blighted anyway, you may as well go in and, dress it up. But I also don't have a fondness for just random graffiti that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, okay? And and there's a guy in this film, he's very smart, he's a social psychologist, and you heard him at the beginning of this clip talking about vigilantism. He really gets into, well, you may not understand what this word says, but I do. I know who this person is. I kind of understand, the contortion of his body when he went to go spray this. He also had to be aware of who was around him. There was, he really got into sort of the moment, the mindset. He filled in the blank of the canvas between himself and the experience. That's a lot of work. I mean, if you've got the time, you've got the temperament, and you have the intention, great. You can get, I'm sure you could get into the mindset of just about anybody. But for most people, they don't want to go there. They want to get to work, or they want to look at something that's pleasing to their eye and not have to, socially deconstruct some random piece of calligraphy that looks really not very pleasant. So I think we all have an opinion on this, and we all chime in on it somewhere. And it's a really fascinating topic, and one that is not ever going to go away, because people have been painting on caves since the dawn of man, and they're going to continue to paint and illustrate and scratch and sticker until the end of time, because that's who we are. And there are no definitive answers that come out of any of this, but ultimately, like the best art, it stirs up dialogue. It gets you to think. And hopefully out of it comes something new or different, a synthesis or an amalgamation of ideas or perspectives that allows you as an individual to engage and interact in the world in a unique way, in a way that did not exist prior to the time that you had experienced this clash of ideas or this clash of ideologies, both inside yourself and outside yourself. To me, that's the best art. All right, so let me jump into this, and let's listen to my interview. This is fresh, by the way. Did this just yesterday, and it's a total guerrilla moment for me because I couldn't be at home and do the interview, so I actually did the interview parked outside of a cafe where I was copying the Wi-Fi signal using Skype, talking with Max, and in the distance, just a couple blocks away on the side of a building where there was a restaurant, a Chinese restaurant. On the side of the wall, that Chinese restaurant, it's a white wall. White walls are like canvases, pure, unadulterated canvases for the graffiti artists. And, of course, there was graffiti there. It was fairly unintelligible from where I sat, but it was big enough for me to notice. That comes up in the interview. Okay, so here I am with Max Vigilante, the director, one of the directors of Vigilante, a story about graffiti art expression, vigilantism, social order, social decay, chaos, entropy, you name it. It all gets played out within the frames of Max and Nate's movie. Here we go.
My next guest is an independent filmmaker who goes by the name of Max Vigilante, and Max and his partner Nate Woolman have just finished and are about to release a very interesting movie called Vigilante, and it's essentially a breakdown of the lives of three quote-unquote vigilantes, men who have decided that they wanted to bring order, if not specifically law, to their neighborhoods by buffing out graffiti that has been done by local graffiti artists. But it's more than just a film about vigilantes. It's a film about property rights, aesthetics, order and chaos, participation versus observation. It's a really interesting film, and I want to welcome you, Max, to Free Association Radio, and just want to congratulate you on a really thought-provoking film.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, the first question always is, what was the impetus behind doing the film? I think that would be, question number one, part one, and question number two, part two would be your relationship to graffiti art and your connection to it as an art form and as a social statement. So let's just jump into those two questions and we'll go from there.
Yeah, well, the original impetus for the film was to find out who this vigilante was in Berkeley. I was seeing all these ugly silver blotches all around town, and I could tell that it probably wasn't the city who was doing this. It looked like the work of a kind of out-of-control vigilante who was out there painting over graffiti illegally and sort of destructively. So I'd seen this going on actually for years in Berkeley, and I was surprised nobody ever stopped this guy or found out who it was. So I decided to actually do some investigating and some stakeout work and try to find the guy and stop him from doing it. And I mean, the reason for that is that I have a background in graffiti and street art, political street art. That I was involved with that culture from age 15 for 15 years or so. So I really appreciate seeing sort of independent communication, independent expression out on the street. To me, it's a sign of dissent and a sign of a sort of active participation in a dialogue, and I enjoy seeing that stuff on the street. So to me, seeing these ugly blotches everywhere was kind of an attack on the environment.
Right. And the fellow you're talking about his name is the Silver Buff. His real name is Jim Sharp. Is that his real name, Jim Sharp?
Yeah, that's his real name.
Okay. We're going to get into him in great detail because he's pretty fascinating. I mean, you cover these three guys: Joe Connolly, the graffiti gorilla, Jim Sharp, Silver Buff, and also Fred Radke, the Gray Ghost, to a lesser extent, and they're all similar, but also they're very different. You know, there's shades of silver with each of them. And let's start with Jim Sharp, because he's really kind of the focus of your film. What was it like when you first caught him? When you were like, "This is the guy, I found him." What did that feel like?
It was an amazing feeling. We were not professional private investigators or anything. We kind of fumbled our way through doing this investigation and uncovering who it was. We're going out and sitting in a car waiting for him in a certain neighborhood in Berkeley. We're putting up a little bait for him to paint over. And then we started putting video cameras in the car. But eventually we caught him on camera, and it took a couple weeks at least of intense stakeout work. We were out there staying up, from midnight to 6 a.m. sometimes, just waiting and watching. So it was a tough job, and it was an amazing feeling to finally catch him on camera. We got him on a camera that we left in a storefront up in North Berkeley, and then we went and checked the footage and we saw him drive up in his car and get out and paint some things, and eventually we were able to track that car down in the neighborhood, and we started staking out that car, putting a camera on it, and we got the guy and figured out who it was.
Well, it's kind of cool. I mean, you guys are kind of like hunters, right? You use your prey, and that brings up a whole other kind of. I mean, the whole thing's kind of Paleolithic in some ways, right? Because you're dealing with glyphs and cave paintings, aka graffiti, and hunting down another member of the species. I mean, we're talking these are really primal kind of activities that you're engaged in an urban environment.
Yeah, it is a primal activity. It's really outside of the norm of everyday life. Most people don't do stakeout. They're not sort of out there on a spy mission. But that's what it felt, and it's really a lot of fun to do something that unique and be outside of your normal life, having a real specific mission in mind.
Well, it's also very different than going online and, going to Intellis and plugging in somebody's details and, and scraping all the information that's been gathered on them in a very kind of sterile way. I mean, you're out there, you're hanging out in an RV, it's raining, it's cold, you're tired, and you're trying to, it's an interesting dynamic. There's a quality of obsession, obviously, with Jim Sharp that comes through in the film. He's not unintelligent. He's actually quite intelligent. What do you know about him as an individual?
We don't know that much about him. He was very open with us from the first day we went. We approached him and filmed with him because we just told him that we were interested in what he was doing and wanted to hear his opinions on stuff. So he was pretty open that day, even though we startled him coming up with two cameras at 6 in the morning when he was walking around doing his routine. But he is a very intelligent guy. He's funny. He's very intriguing. He's a kind of mysterious character. He says he used to work in city planning. He says he went to Cal. He did tell us that he used to work at the Space Sciences Laboratory. But we could find barely anything about his career or his life online. I assume he's retired, and he lived with art center up in North Berkeley, just above Northside campus. But we were surprised that he wasn't actually defensive, and he was enjoyable to talk to, and I think we kind of enjoyed each other's company, even though we were definitely sort of taking an antagonistic role with him.
It felt at times that you guys would almost break into these kind of Socratic dialogues about property rights and, you know, who's right and who's wrong. It was very, very fascinating stuff. I mean, conversely, you know, as mysterious as Jim Sharp is, Joe Connolly, who is his counterpart, and is also a sort of a celebrity, I guess, is very gregarious, very out there, very transparent, wears his emotions on his sleeves. This cat was very interesting, and you know, very complex. What was your relationship like with him, and what's it like today after the making of the film?
That's a good question. Well, Joe, in contrast to Jim, who's kind of quiet, kind of mysterious, and mild-mannered mostly, Joe is totally out of control. He talks a mile a minute. He'll talk to anyone on the street. He can be extremely rude and extremely funny. He's kind of like a comedian. He can be very crude, and he's very aggressive. He doesn't hesitate to get into confrontational situations. But he also, he's a very complex guy. He's got all these conflicting emotions inside of him, like anger and pain and wanting to help, but also wanting to hurt people, I think. He's got a sort of aggressive, and he's also very sensitive. You know, he acts like this, like he doesn't care about anything. He can be extremely sensitive. Possibly sort of manic, depressive, but mostly manic. And Joe, our relationship with Joe in the beginning, it was good. He was very open to being filmed and explaining his motivations and what he does. And we were open with him from the beginning that we were taking a critical eye to the Vigilante buffing phenomena. So I think he knew where we were coming from, and he kind of wanted to be a part of the graffiti culture. So there's graffiti writers, his friends, and I think he kind of wants to accept it within the community. We tried to be fair to him in the movie, and I think we did a pretty good job. He has been mad at us about one particular clip that we put in that shows him painting graffiti himself, that's particularly hypocritical. I don't want to give it away, but he was really mad about that. But we just told him that we couldn't take it out. It was too poignant, and you know, a lot of the film is about hypocrisy and about the parallels between these guys and the graffiti writers. They, you know, kind of two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating character studies. I mean, if you want to get into, you know, sort of the psychological DNA of somebody like Joe Connolly, I mean, you know, I think the real touch point is the loss of his son, which he touches on very briefly in the film. And his son, I guess, was named Adam, and I think he passed away when he was 10 or 11 years old. And, you know, I have no idea what this man was like before his son passed, but it seems to me that would be an event in somebody's life that would cause them to really reach a tipping point for some kind of order in their lives. And, you know, this need for order is really apparent, you know, throughout the film with the vigilante component of the movie. and at the same time, you've got sort of this chaos that ensues out of their order. You know what I mean? That scene at the end of the film, where it goes down, is a pretty chaotic scene. I mean, who's who, what's what, who are the taggers? It's just it's this whole dance between chaos and order is fascinating, which I want to talk about. But there seems to be, at least in the life of Joe Connolly, an event that pushed him to this place. Did he talk much to you guys about the loss of his son in the movie?
He did. We decided that we didn't want to focus too much on the loss of his son. And I think it was really a series of events in his life that created who he is today. It wasn't just the loss of his son. He was doing this anti-graffiti work, I think, at least 5-10 years before his son died in 1999.
Right.
And we've seen footage of him from before that, before his son died. And he's pretty similar, but I think that was a seminal moment for him. It may have pushed him. I think he even says it pushed him over the edge to really not caring what anybody thinks. And I think he's just got a lot of pain and loss in his life that he's struggling to make some sense out of, and also running from by involving himself in all these activities and this fight for order in his community.
Yeah, the guy's a freaking dynamo. I mean, and he makes a
sort of misguided the way he tried to fight for order, and maybe.
Yeah, I mean, he even says, if I stop, I'll go insane, right, or I'll go mad.
Yeah. He says he's just got to keep moving, or he'll lose it.
My relationship or feeling with him in the movie, I actually have compassion for him.
Right.
Jim, I'm not sure I have compassion for, but I'm certainly intrigued by. There's an edge and a mysterious quality which you touch on with him. And then there's the third character, Fred Radke, who I have to tell you is a little creepy. That there's something creepy about Fred Radke. And maybe it's because, the guy who was putting up the NOLA Rising graffiti was really trying to make a positive statement in a town that had been absolutely devastated on many levels. And he couldn't see the forest for the trees with that. And his edge, his vibe was just, at least with Joe and with Jim, there was a degree of ownership and certainly with Joe, transparency. I didn't get that at all, Radke. In fact, it felt really shifty to me. What was your take on him and your relationship like with him during the film?
Sorry, you're breaking up a little bit.
Okay, I was just commenting about sort of the shifty nature of Fred Radke, and what was your relationship like with him during the film, the making of the film?
Yeah, Fred Radke turned out to be sort of our stock villain in the movie. That was partly because we weren't able to interview him. He wasn't open with us like Jim and Joe were. He refused an interview, and we just didn't have that much material on him. And he also is a lot more disliked in his community of New Orleans than Jim and Joe are in their respective cities. New Orleans, from what we saw, and we went there, 3 times. What we saw was most of the community didn't like what he was doing. I thought he was out of control. He would paint over anything. And, in a city where there's a lot of suffering, a lot of poverty, a lot of violence, and then they had this disaster, tragedy of Katrina. There's a lot of artists there who are trying to bring a little bit of life back to the city. Rick Stingler with Gull Rising was one of those, and he was doing things like putting up street signs, painting his own street signs after the storm had, ripped things down. He would paint street signs and put them up on telephone poles to help people get around, and or inspiring messages like, hope and, Nola Rising itself, just trying to inspire people to bring the city back to the way it was and resurrect the city. And Radke was just painting over these signs because he couldn't stand any sort of street art, any sort of illegal expression, anything out of the norm. He was just, totally indiscriminate in what he painted over.
Right.
So the footage in the movie of him is actually from television interviews and other people's interviews in the past. And very late after the movie was pretty much already edited, I was able to find him while he was painting out in the graffiti, and I did get to ask him some questions and talk to him. That's on the DVD extras. That's on the DVD that's coming out tomorrow.
So this whole notion of graffiti, street art, personal expression, property, personal property rights, private property rights, who owns what, all these issues get brought up in the film. And I don't think there's any real definitive answer that arises around some very delicate questions about what this all means. And, for me, it's like I see this as like two sort of titanic psychic forces, kind of in a Jungian way getting played out, order and chaos. And they have to get played out somehow, some way for the psychic health of the planet or a culture or a society. And at the same time, I also view graffiti with, at least from my own personal perspective, as I do believe it's art. Some of it. And other pieces of graffiti I really don't think is quite that artistic or creative. And for me, I guess the litmus, and this is just for me, the litmus is it creative? And then you get into the whole thing, well, your creativity as a 51-year-old male living in, Northern California is not the same kind of creativity that a 13-year-old Latino living in East Oakland would have. There's different notions of creativity. So then we get into the whole subjective relationship with art at that point, and then that's where it gets all mixed up. And I guess out of all this, you have a dialogue, you have a debate, which could be good, I think, if it is allowed to percolate and become interesting. And I guess, for me, I guess this is where I'm going with this. As somebody who's on the inside of the graffiti world, are there standards? If somebody just puts up, shit, is that okay? Or because everything goes and it's just a form of personal expression, there's no judgment, it's art, we dialogue with it, we interact with it, or is it like, there are, there's the Keith Haring level, which is, approaching, something different, something that is, adding to the environment versus subtracting. What's some of the dynamics around that inside the graffiti community? Because I think people on the outside want to have at least some critical measure as to how to interact with the material that's always in their face.
Yeah. Well, there are some recognized standards, and I think almost all people would agree that some graffiti is destructive and uncalled for and hurtful. But it's important to realize that graffiti is not one monolithic force. It's not an organized, group of people. It's a bunch of individuals. I like to compare it to speech in general. There's some speech that's reprehensible and that most people would not want to hear or to be apparent in their communities, but that doesn't represent the whole of speech. The same way with graffiti, you have everything from a angry young kid who might just want to mess something up or cause a nuisance or express some frustration to someone who has a highly developed political message or artistic message who really feels like they're putting something out there that contributes to the environment and communicates with people. But sort of the whole point about graffiti and street art and the legal expression is that anybody can do it, and it's up to the individual to decide what they believe is right and what they're willing to do, what kind of boundaries they're willing to transgress in order to express themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, I understand what you're saying about this dance between order and chaos, but I also think that if you look at what we define as order, sort of clean communities, civilization, a lot of that under the surface is not orderly, and graffiti is just a tiny little symbolic mark that may be fighting against the order that we see around us. But I think if you want to look at real chaos, you look at sort of what our idea of order is doing to the environment or doing to the underclasses of the world. That's my idea of disorder. So I think for people to point out graffiti, to use it as a scapegoat, as something, a symbol of what's wrong with the world, that people have no respect for society, that the decline of civilization. I think it's misguided and a little hypocritical in a way.
Well, so here's my rebuttal, or is my response to that. When you talk about free speech, I could say right here, right now on my radio show something derogatory or inflammatory, and it would be recorded, obviously. How many people would actually, hear it? That's a whole nother, subject. But if I'm passing in the street and I say something derogatory to somebody or inflammatory, that comment may clang around their head for a while, but there's a good chance that maybe a year from now it would recede in its significance. It would essentially evaporate into the ethers. However, and right now I'm looking across the street at a restaurant, and somebody has taken graffiti, a spray can, right here on San Pablo, and sprayed their message on the side of that restaurant, which somebody owns, and that's not going away. Whatever that thing is, I can't really see it. It's hidden by the trees. That's not going away. So I understand this notion and the necessity to have free speech, because I do believe in free speech. Whether or not you agree with somebody, they need to have the right to be able to express themselves. But I think that there's a difference between what somebody says and what somebody posts on an edifice that isn't really even their own. And I think to me that's a real clear distinction. And how do you respond to that?
I agree. There is a distinction. It's, to me, I sort of think about it in terms of public space being something that we all have to experience, and the fact that some people have no chance to express themselves in any sort of significant way in the public space because they don't own property or they can't afford billboards or advertisements. I think that in some ways, for them to take it upon themselves to use that space and write a message, post a flyer or something like that, it sort of democratizes the public space. It becomes a matter of equality, and I don't think it's always justified. I think there's certain places that are unconstructed to post a message, and I think there's a lot of people out there who aren't even thinking about these issues. They're only thinking about their own ego or their own aggression, and they just write on whatever they feel like it. I don't think that's right. I think people should put some thought into it, but then again, there's reasons for people to feel frustrated and stifled, and that they don't have outlets to express themselves. And then there's just a lot of ugly, blank space in our world. There's a lot of
Are you there?
unused space that could be used for people to express themselves. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. So yeah, I can. One of the things that I think, like a really healthy community, would be a community that kind of polices itself. Okay, that they wouldn't really need any third party to take care of business, whatever that business was inside their community. I mean, this is what this would ultimately what we would strive for, which would be some form of self-governance, some form of social autonomy and interdependence. And I'm wondering from you, because I don't know a lot about the graffiti community, are there those kinds of standards inside the graffiti community where people can say, hey, I know so-and-so, and your tagging is shite, or your message is, really hateful, you need to back off, or, what kind of dialogues go on inside the graffiti community with the content and the delivery of the content itself?
Yeah. Well, there's kind of a unwritten code that you do not write on people's personal property. It's mostly commercial or public property that people will write on. That's not. Some people will always break the rules, whatever they are. But typically, it's frowned upon to write on people's cars, to write on houses, to write on the front window of a small community business. Those things are looked down upon, and most people don't do them. But it's a matter of the individual deciding what they think is right. You'll always have some people doing things that we might not think are productive.
Right. I think it's fascinating. There's this one scene where you're talking with Jim, and you're getting into sort of this philosophical discourse about some of the stuff we're talking about. And in the background, some people might say I'm a conspiracy theorist, and I wouldn't necessarily back off of that. But one of the things that I have been working with for quite a while as part of my political awareness are these things called chemtrails. And there's the scene where you guys are talking about, who owns what. And in the background, these planes are laying down these really thick and greasy chemtrails in the sky, which ultimately both you and Jim are going to breathe. And to me, it was kind of like, well, maybe it's not chemtrails, but it could be something else. It could be, Wall Street sucking up trillions of dollars, or GM moving the majority or the bulk of its operation to China, after they had received a huge bailout from the United States. They now have 70% of their operation in China, and they've done it on the backs of taxpayers' dollars. So what we have are these really massive kind of titanic, issues that we're dealing with, and kind of on the streets there's this drama being played out on the graffiti side of things, or at least the side of personal expression. And it's a fascinating contrast that some of the angst gets played out at a street level, while there's, considerably, much more intense on some level things happening at a macro level. And I guess maybe graffiti tries to attempt to address some of these things, but I just thought it was an interesting contrast, and I think you actually do touch on that in the film to a certain extent.
Yeah, I agree. There is a contrast between this small-scale local battle that's being fought for expression on the street, in comparison to these huge cultural and economic battles, political battles that are happening in our world. But yeah, I think they can sort of inform each other, and that the small scale is definitely important, and for people to have some freedom to go out and maybe put up a message that wouldn't get through the mainstream media, and for them to do that maybe illegally on the back of a stop sign or something. That's important. It's important that we don't live in a totally authoritarian society where that kind of dissent has been totally eliminated.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like I said, to me, the graffiti and the street art represents some little spark of freedom that's still out there.
Mm-hmm.
When we have a lot of oppressive and depressing things happening in our world.
One of the things that we've seen over the course of the last year and a half, 2 years in this country, are the enactment of anti-hate speech laws. Has the anti-hate speech legislation seeped into the graffiti world? Is that impacting people, and are they being busted now for hate speech when they actually paint some graffiti?
Well, I haven't heard of anybody in the graffiti community being busted for hate speech. Generally, from what I see, when you see a story in the media about some racist or hateful graffiti that's been put up, on a church or something, it's not people who are typically involved in graffiti. It's probably people who are typically involved in hate who've used graffiti to exert some power to sort of violate. I think that's a sort of violation of the public space. And, racist messages, swastikas, anti-Muslim messages, all that stuff is totally despised within most of the graffiti and street art community that I've been around. Those would be the opposite people, but like I said, graffiti runs the gamut. It's everything from hippies to Nazis.
Right.
Can do it, and everything in between.
I don't know if you know about this story. It took place about 3 or 4 years ago, and there was a lot of anti-Semitic graffiti being sprayed in a particular area in New York. And there was a guy who was renting an apartment, and he actually shot himself in the leg. and the manager of the apartment heard the shot, and he called the police, and they were able to figure out where the shot came from and everything. And they went inside this guy's apartment, and they found all these cans of spray paint. And not only did they find the cans of spray paint, but they found a stash of weapons, and they figured out that this guy was actually a member of the Mossad. He had Mossad credentials. So what this guy was doing, and they had linked the graffiti via the paint. They figured it out. It was his paint that was spraying this anti-Semitic graffiti. I mean, it was really mind-blowing, because here you had somebody that was actually fomenting hate, but it was somebody from within that culture or that religion that was doing it. And I think that maybe, what happens, and I don't know if this is isolated or not, but there's kind of at times this victimization that can be marketed by people within a community. I don't know. It was a really bizarre story, and I don't know if you'd heard of that or not, but I found it to be fascinating on many levels.
Yeah, I never heard about that story. That is amazing, and it's funny that the Mossad would think it's that important to have an agent out there spray painting messages on the street. But that's how powerful that graffiti can be, and especially hate speech causes a big uproar.
Yeah.
And it's clear they were probably trying to get some result that they wanted by putting out the hate messages. Maybe more legislation to protect their community, or to start more antagonism with Muslims or something.
Right. It's interesting. The flip side of that is there are these pro-Muslim, I believe, posters being put up there's pro-Muslim and anti-Muslim posters being put up now in the subways in New York, and somebody defaced one. This happened like in the last day or two. They defaced one of the posters, and I forget if it was pro or con, but they got in trouble for it. It was like, you can't do that. And it was a graffiti moment. Did you hear about this?
Yeah, I saw that story. There's a video of a woman. I think she's an Egyptian blogger or something. She spray painted over the. I don't know what the message is, but they say it's an anti-Muslim poster. It's a pro-Israel anti-Muslim poster.
Right.
And yeah, it got a lot of media attention. There were cameras there and everything. It would have been different if she had just defaced it and nobody had been there to witness it. But yeah, it can be a powerful act to deface something or to put a message out there that it's not allowed.
Yeah, absolutely. It speaks to the power of graffiti, which is really in many ways what your film is about. The film looks good, by the way. You've got a really nice blend of animation and live footage. The music is terrific. I really like the music. Are you guys going to put together a soundtrack for this film by any chance?
We're not planning to put out a soundtrack, but we'll consider it. Maybe we'll just do one online. Somehow we can link to all the tracks, maybe.
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, some of the music in the film is by band Japanther, the sort of rock and roll punk band. And there's a guy named Mike Hoffman, who's a local, who made a lot of the sort of electronic beats in the film, and a bunch of other artists. Putting together the music was a lot of fun. Also, one of the biggest challenges of making a movie, trying to get music without paying an arm and a leg for it.
Always is. So let's talk about where people can actually view the film. Where can they see this really cool movie about about graffiti and rights and order and chaos?
So the film is being released tomorrow. That's September 28th, Friday, on DVD and on iTunes and Amazon and a bunch of other digital outlets. Probably the best way to see the film, to order it, would be to go to our website at vigilantefilm.com, one word. And right at the top there, there's an order the film button. And yeah, we've been playing in theaters and at festivals for like the last year, and now the film's finally coming out widely for the public. So we're excited and hope it catches. Hope it becomes a little bit of a cult movie that people talk about and it actually spreads around and people get to see.
Well, I think that it really ranks right up there in the best tradition of Herzog and Errol Morris and Les Blanc in terms of documentaries and personal documentaries. I think it's its own right, it's a very important film. People need to kind of get involved in the dialogue and understand this issue at a more of a kind of a fractal level. Anyway, I want to thank you, Max, for sharing your thoughts and being a part of the show today. It was really cool, and best of luck to you with all your future endeavors.
Thank you so much, and yeah, the film's all about inspiring that dialogue. That's
cool.
what we're trying to do.
All right, Max Vigilante, the director of Vigilante. Thanks again.
Thanks.
So there we go. That was the interview with Max Vigilante, which took place yesterday. It's interesting sitting down and listening to the interview after the fact. I'll let you in a little secret. I don't listen to my shows that much. So when I sit down and listen to an interview, it's actually really instructive for me. And I know theoretically I should, because I can learn from them in many ways. And I did today in this interview. I must have said about 25 times, which is about 25 times too many. So that was good. That was good. At least for me it was good, because I got to hear myself say a lot. And I also got to listen to my questions quite a bit. It was interesting. Anyway, aside from me thinking about me and talking about me, it was a good interview, and I really recommend this film. You can go to the website, vigilantefilm.com, and you can go to Amazon, or you can go to iTunes, and you can download the movie and watch it. This is where we are now. We are in the era of instant media coming right to you through the portal of the Internet. Speaking of the Internet's under attack. I don't know if you've noticed this lately, but there are more and more instances creeping up of major breakdowns in terms of cybersecurity, and so this is going to be something to keep your eye on. Whenever it's funny, because there used to be a time where there would be media that was made that would be considered predictive programming, and that predictive programming would take place sometimes years after the fact. For instance, there was that famous scene in the TV show The Lone Gunman, which is essentially 9/11 being played out before 9/11 happened. This was months before it happened, so this was not too. This is pretty close in terms of the timeline. I'm thinking, let's go back to Minority Report, and in the movie Minority Report, which came out, I think, in 2000 and what was it? 5? I think it was 2005. So that was 7 years ago. In Minority Report, there are people, of course it's in the future, it's set in the future, there are people that use these tablets in order to read books and to read newspapers. And that's exactly where we are right now. We're in the tablet stage of converting media, print media, into digital media. So that was kind of a predictive programming model that was surfaced in Minority Report. But the predictive programming stuff, there was generally a level of lead time so that it can be integrated. Well, currently there are 2 shows, actually 3 shows that are breaking on TV that brings the whole predictive programming angle really close into the present. One is a show called Cybergeddon, and it's about a breach in the virtual world with security and all kinds of other stuff. It's like a breakdown. It's like a breakdown of internet structure, internet communication, and what happens as a result of that. That show is just now, launching, Cybergeddon. And of course, what we're experiencing online is sort of the early precursor to a Cybergeddon with a number of these major breaches that are taking place. The second show is a show that has to do with, it's called Revolution, and it has to do with life on planet Earth, especially the United States, after the power goes out, and how people deal with a post-apocalyptic or post-technological society. And that's happening right now. There's another show called Homeland, which is all about searching out, rooting out, terrorists. These are all taking place right now on TV in real time. So the window, the predictive programming window, is shrinking and getting closer and closer and closer to the present, which is, I think, pretty fascinating. Anyway, I'm not sure why I'm talking about this, but it has something to do with art imitating life, life imitating art, and vice versa, which I think happened to a large extent in this film. But I think where I was going with this was the ability to access media instantaneously, and you can do that, and you can go to Amazon, you can go to iTunes and download this film. It's a really good film. So, okay, I'm not sure how much more I have to say today, so I'll probably just sign off early. It is 11:22, by the way, and I'll be back on Monday. And on Monday, I'll devote half the show to a lovely woman from South Africa named Nia Nell, who is a singer-songwriter. She's an author. She has an amazing voice, a 4-octave range. I'll play a little of her music. And I talked to her early last week, and we got into her life and her art and how she was able to carve out an international singing career, being born in a pretty anonymous place in Namibia, of all places. I think you'll really enjoy her. I did. She's lovely. And her book, which is, I think it's just coming out on Hay House, will be available also online and through Amazon. Well, I'll talk more about her book on Monday and where she'll be in the United States promoting her book, I think in the next week or two. Hay House is a big public event in New York City where they bring in all their authors, and the authors get to share and talk about their books. So she'll be there in a week and a half, 2 weeks, but she'll be with me on Monday talking about being a mother, having a recording career, and finding your true inner self, loving yourself. Very important thing to do. Okay, so again, thanks, Max Vigilante, for chiming in and sharing your insight and thoughts about the film. And thank you, everyone who has listened to today's broadcast and always listens to whatever it is that we're doing here. I really appreciate it. So use your head to discern what's real, your heart to discern what's possible. And if you go out and tag, do us all a favor and tag something that is at the very least meaningful in your own way. Live your own tag. This is Robert Phoenix. You've been listening to the Friday FARcast. I will see you on Monday. Adios.
We are living in a a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off